There have been so many things going on. Everybody's, going up and down with changes. There's been some threats of new tariffs that have been going in and out there and out there. And well, they actually implemented some new tariffs. There's been the elimination of the minimis that has gone in, and we'll see how the overall effect is on that. Although I will say on that, the elimination of the de minimis for everybody except for the post office, which to a point I have an issue with, but okay. With that, I will say that as we're going around and everybody's trying to keep their sanity and all that, I hope you got some sleep last night and you're able to have a fresh day so that we're looking at everything with fresh eyes and fresh ears and all that, because we're going to have a good discussion today. But Lalo, how are you doing, my friend? It's a new morning for me. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree, and so it is. It's a lot of things going on. In trade recently, the U.S. Court of Appeals said that the IEPA or a lot of the added tariffs are illegal, and so they're letting the administration appeal it to the Supreme Court through October. I think it was 15, 17, something like that. But anyway, so there's a lot of turmoil, a lot of indecision, and like, what are we going to do now? I mean, obviously, right now, the best thing to do is just to go as if that wasn't even decided. Just because you still need to pay your tariffs because it's under appeal right now, or pending having to appeal it, and I'm sure to the Supreme Court. But you're right. I mean, there's just things that change on a dime sometimes that folks need to be aware of and stay up on top of, and make sure they're still in compliance. And so that's why we're excited to have the next couple of guests here on our show from Flexport, who, I mean, if anybody deals with this, I mean, look at them. I mean, they deal with it. They're first of all, they're global. I mean, they've got staff all over the world that are moving cargo all over the world. They develop their own technology. They have their own in-house compliance experts. They have their own in-house logistics experts. I mean, you name it, it's all wrapped up into one nice little neat bundle. And build a really nice organization there.
Yes.
Anyway, I'm happy to have these two guests come in our show to kind of explain a lot of what goes on for a like a turnkey solution. Let's say, although we're not talking so much about the actual solution itself, but just how they deal with the whole situation.
Well, I will say that we've got some some rapid changes going on and all that. But before we did, I just wanted to point out something. Is you and I both have been asked, is like with the different hats that I've got. I've put my hats up on the wall. So if you're listening to the podcast, go to the YouTube and you'll get to see some of this. But I put up some of the different ones. It's not all of them and all that. So it's like, it's people have asked, which hats that I usually wear and all that kind of stuff. It's kind of a funny deal. With that, let's bring on our folks, our guests from Flexport, as you just mentioned. We've got a policy interpretation type of a fellow that is into knowing, I guess, what's going on and has a great job with that. And then we have the tech side of things. Marcus, forgive me, guys, I don't have your last names in front of me right now, but Marcus, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we'll go to Alex.
Certainly. My name is Marcus Eeman, and I'm a director of custom systems and process here at Flexport. And forgive me for being not quite having the level of diction I'm used to. If that's coming across on the podcast, I just had a dentist appointment this morning because, of course, I did. So, but very happy to be here. Happy to talk about all the changing chaos that's going on these days.
Excellent, Alex.
Yeah, I'm Alex Nederlof. I'm based out of Amsterdam, so I'm quite far in my day already. I am the Senior Director of Trade and Financial Services, so the engineering group that takes care of all of our customs, drawback, but also all of our capital business, insurance, climate technology, and our not-for-profit, where we ship goods to disaster areas.
I love Amsterdam and the Netherlands there. I just have some good friends over there and had the opportunity. Literally, they drove me all over the country, which doesn't take a whole lot of time, to be honest.
Yeah, it's very
But
small.
it was some fantastic time, great people, and all of that. Marcus, hey, with all this rapid change and everything, how in the world are you keeping your sanity? I mean, with everything that's
A
going
lot of
on.
Red Bull, I guess, right? You just make sure.
There you go. Yeah,
Who says he is?
Haven't broken out the Red Bull, but I have gone for coffee, which has gotten more expensive in the last few months. So,
Yeah.
yeah, no, I think with this, the biggest thing is just trying to stay organized, right? It's like we have a single couple of places. I say that single couple of places. We have a few different places where we track different programs, things that have changed, where things are in the process, and kind of know, okay, when does this go into effect? When is this actually going to happen? Where are we going to see this? Which countries are affected? I think that's really just kind of been the main way we've just sort of stayed sane. But ultimately, it's a dynamic time. Things are moving really quick. Things are moving really fast. We get announcements on Friday, go into effect on Monday, like we saw just a couple of weeks ago with the expanded 232 list on steel and aluminum. So, I think anybody that's keeping on track of it today is doing the best they can. And, I like to say we're a magic wand, but there's just a lot of hard work behind the scenes and just to keep ourselves updated and to keep everybody else updated.
I will say that there's a lot of reading, a lot of interpretation, and whatnot. I guess let me ask this question: is for those, there's a lot of our audience that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to keep up with things, and they're getting yanked 6 ways from Sunday and all of that. I guess part of the scenario there would be looking to see maybe the X or Twitter, whatever it is, updates and True Social updates coming out, more of an advanced knowledge of what's being talked about. And then you're monitoring the Federal Registry notices for the official, right?
That's correct. Yeah. I think, I was in DC back in February, and I heard from a customs official. And, they said that they didn't know about some of those tariffs that first went into effect in February until they saw it on True Social. Like some very senior people at CBP, they're finding out the same way that we are, through True Social, through social media posts. So that's kind of their main way. But yeah, when it comes to actually giving advice, we want to see something official. We want to see at least a White House press release. We want to see an executive order language. We want to see Federal Register. Exactly right. There's just so much out there that we can't respond to every rumor. We want to try to get the best information, which means we need to get sometimes a little bit slower information, even if we have a high speed direction coming from the White House. Yeah.
So with all of that is then when you see something that's going to require an update to the systems or some action on the tech side, I assume that you're then deciphering, if you will, and translating into layman terms. Okay, here's what's going on. This is basically what it means. This is what we need to have the system updated, and you send that over to Alex and his team, right?
That's exactly it. Yeah. So we try to find out and say, like, okay, it's going to affect these countries, these HTS codes. This is how it's going to work. And because we've had so much change, we've just kind of the only thing we've been expecting is more change. And so a big part of what Alex's team has done is we now have different like small tools that help us, extract, what HTS codes are going to be affected quickly, because some of those Federal Register notices, you may know, are, they're images. They're not like text based of what HTS codes are affected. They're just like a screenshot. But we have more tools now to try to, extract those faster, get those lists published quicker. So that's exactly right, though. So we've tried to find hacky solutions and put it behind a nice front, which powers some of our global facing tools like our tariff tracker. Yeah.
So Alex, how in the world are you keeping your sanity? It's like you probably have your best laid out day and everything's going well, and all of a sudden it could change in a fleeting moment.
Yeah, well, especially lately, because being in Amsterdam, for us, it's our Friday night that the registry gets published, and then we know that that's going to be the weekend. But like Marcus said, we've developed a few tools that we can ingest these rules faster. What requires the most time, what people tend to underestimate, is we don't have to make it work for just a few products that we handle. We actually make it work across the board because we really digitize the entire decision tree of which HS codes need to apply. So I've seen diagrams that make me dizzy of Marcus and our other expert, Deepak, of what happens if you have and steel and aluminium and copper in one product, and the boat leaves then, but it doesn't do, and the moon is in this position, and what else is part of the equation these days. And it
Is it a
all
red
needs
moon,
to,
a full moon, or a half moon?
yeah. And we've developed all this internal. So then you get these huge decision trees basically, and then we've written a bunch of tools to codify them into our core product, and we expose this to anybody in the world through our tariff simulator that everybody can use, and that will actually encompass all parameters possible to really get you the true landed cost as far as we can actually compute it, because there are, of course, like ambiguous things that we don't know. You need to know more about your product to be able to understand better, but you can even flag those in the simulator as well. So yeah, that's what it looks like. We know it's coming, and we're just on standby with the team. And as soon as it comes out, it goes through Marcus and Deepak first, and they map it out into like a compute version. So it's not layman's terms; it's actually highly specialized. And then there's an engineering team that codifies it, and typically we can have it implemented within 24 hours. But it depends on the level of craziness.
Well, I guess with that is, as you're looking at it and updating your system, are you able to, again, I'm going to be very simplistic, and this is really Lalo's background, more of on the programming side. But I'm sitting here thinking, it's like, okay, as things come out, surely you've got tables that you can update rather than doing hard coding, because if you can update that, and then the process also is in the calculation, is that may have to change in that algorithm to say, if you have X, Y, and Z, it's going through these tables and say, yeah, let me grab that, and all. But is that kind of the concept you've got, or how are you able to, with all these different systems?
Yeah, so to not go too deep into like actual, this is not an engineering podcast, so I shouldn't talk about like very specific nerdy things, but it's a combination, right? So we of course have like data lookup tables. So it's, imagine like changing an Excel sheet with new values. And then we have some simple rules that you can say, well, if this, then that, and you don't actually need to actually change any code. There's like conditionals that we've built in. But we've seen like there's a lot of variance, let's say, in the new regulation. It's hard to predict what combinations they're going to require. And then we actually program. But we are like a true technology company. We have amazing engineering talent. So it's actually not a hard lift for us to just change the program, and then with one click it deploys across all of our platforms. So anything inside Flexport now immediately uses the new rule set. So we don't have to, for example, train brokers or train other operators. The system just takes care of you, which is also why it's so important for us that we respond fast.
Well, and the reason I was setting this up for is that now the end customer that you have that may be using your tools and all of this. I mean, Marcus, you're going through, you're trying to keep things up. I'm sure that you're drafting things to communicate, obviously, internally to the tech side, as we just went through, but also somehow is working with your communications team to communicate to your client base. If somebody's looking at it and going, well, I don't know if I really agree with the way this has come out. So somewhere along the line is being able to walk through the process to say, okay, I've got this issue. I've got this product, let's say from South Africa or wherever, and it's coming in. It's this commodity or this widget has these, it's made out of these certain metals or fabric or whatever the case may be. And they go through and walk through that process so that you're looking at the policy from a standpoint to say, okay, there's going to be an X tariff on this for whatever reason, and the added tariffs, if there are any, and you walk through that, and then you compare that to what the system does. That's where I was going with this, is that then being able to say, okay, I got to tell you, with so much change, I'm sure there's times of like, you know what, we got to tweak this. We didn't quite get that right this time. It's not if, it's when, and how do you deal with it? So as you're walking through that, and the client base out there sees something and they're trying to understand it, it may be that you've got it right. They just need to understand the interpretation of all that. But how do you go through that kind of a process?
Yeah, I think before we try to roll it out, to like the production side, to like the client facing side, we try to run it through some like kind of stress testing sorts of things. So like in your example, right, if we have 4 different things, it's part textiles, part metal, HGS is this, the origin's that, and the date is this, how do all those things work out? And then we just take a look and say, okay, we have this list of rules, right? And we got this, this is what the machine spat out. Does it match what I think it should? And, does that actually kind of go through? So I think we do kind of a bit of that. And then we have to say, no, this isn't quite right. So, we look at something like, Brazilian extension cords, like that used to be very simple until like, you go back 6 months ago and this was very easy. But now there's all these different overlaps because now there's copper tariffs, there's aluminum tariffs that flag for it. There's the Brazilian special rates, because they had the situation with their president. Like there's all sorts of different layers that are happening right now. And so we got to make sure that we know what those dates are and read the regulation and make sure we got it programmed correctly.
Marcus, let me ask you, I guess you brought up something very interesting, and so did and I guess this kind of is also going to bleed into Alex, but whereas traditionally prior to January and all these different requirements with tariffs, especially with derivatives and especially things like that, and not only that, but also I guess transshipments. Trying to make sure where the country of origin is, because I guess the rules of origin have changed a little because of the substantial transformation. And anyway, there's so many different things, so many factors. But my point is, whereas before you used to only track at the product level, the product that's actually coming in, now you have to track at the, bill of material level. How has that become a challenge? Like, but I mean, I'm sure that had to change the way you do systems and what customers divulge to you, because I'm sure I used to be in software. Just a little bit quick brief. I used to we used to sell or I used to develop and sell. I was part of a company that did free trade agreements and cross border with Mexico, U.S. And so we did all the invoicing and all the manifest, you name it. Anyway, so typically kind of what you did, but back in the day before AI. So back in the big systems days of IBM AS400, System 3638, that kind of stuff, the big stuff. So anyway, so as you can tell from my white hair, that was back in my day. So anyway, clients tend to not want to divulge who their suppliers are for obvious reasons, right? I mean, so I'm not going to ask for any trade secrets or anything on how do you get around that or anything, but how has that created the issue and the concerns, or the like even grown probably your team because you now have to track at that level? Or am I wrong? I mean, do you not have to track at that level?
Well, I think what we're still kind of waiting to see is like how strong the enforcement stance is going to be from customs on that, right? To your point is like, when you have to like find out like certain, things for origin, it is a substantial transformation. That is still the rule. But when it comes especially to like the 232 tariffs, where you're allowed to break out the steel or aluminum value in an imported product, there's some open questions that are big and unsettled right now, where it's like, okay, well, which value do we use? Like, how do we calculate it? There's an FAQ from customs that's pretty vague, and you can very easily read it 2 different ways. And so, what we're kind of pointing toward is definitely a much deeper kind of bill of materials thing that mostly, a lot of importers haven't really had to contend with unless they've been claiming improving free trade agreements. Free trade agreements have kind of always had this sort of like proof of where's production, what's the value add, in this different place, like where was it before, when it, came in, when it left, what was it? So I think with those, what we're seeing is so far customs hasn't quite yet come to the point where they're really getting that invasive, but we're starting to see the first questions getting asked. Like I'd say like the last 2 months, we've been seeing more requests for information that are asking for that greater level of detail, saying, okay, you're saying X value is, comes from China and X value comes from India. Okay, well, prove it. And so now we're starting to see a couple of those questions. And, I think a part of it is also what's the enforcement going to look like? They have to interpret it and give us clear guidance and give importers clear guidance, which in many respects they haven't yet. I think certainly, in the 232 round is one area where I think we're looking for a lot more. You mentioned transshipment. That's another one where they haven't exactly defined what it means to have been transshipped for the purpose of a 40% tariff versus like a 20% tariff or a lower one. We have a traditional definition that we could apply. Is that relevant here? Are they looking for value add? Are they looking for substantial transformation to define a transshipment? That hasn't been defined yet, which is troubling and very difficult to then comply with if you don't know the rules.
Well, I got to say, and Lalo, that was a good question as you're going through that, is that as I think the compliance side of it, customs is still, working out the rules, if you will. And there's going to be some enforcement on the back end. So it's like, well, so the point being is regardless of whatever and however you're calculating things now, and everybody I'm sure is trying to do their best so that they can, there's got to be some kind of a audit trail in a sense of how did you come to this decision?
Yes.
So that in looking at it, it gives some kind of if you will, a benchmark to go and information to go back with customs on the auditing side, and how are they going to deal with it?
Yeah, and that's that's actually a key point for importers. For importers to the U.S., they have this new this new standard since the Mod Act called reasonable care. And the idea is that you have to take reasonable understanding of your supply chain. So documenting your rationale for things and saying, okay, there's a little bit of gray area here. Customs hasn't defined it. How are we going to define it internally? What's our business rule going to be for this? And you can make some pretty good justifications. And what that can do is, even if you get it wrong, you may avoid, or you can at least maybe look to mitigate some of the stronger penalties. They don't think maybe you're being grossly negligent. Maybe you're just being slightly negligent. And even then, maybe they'll be willing to be a little more understanding and say, well, yeah, it was a little crazy. So if you do have that kind of clear documentation about why you did what you did in this uncertainty, that helps to meet your reasonable care standard, and also can look good if you ever get penalized and you want to try to mitigate it, saying this is why we thought what we did in the absence of clearer guidance. That satisfies both those things.
I'll say this and see if you agree with this, is that I'm out of our discussion already. There are two actions that I see that the C-suite needs to be looking at taking. One is to make sure that your compliance area is staffed up. They need more staffing to handle this. Folks, you got to understand the workload on compliance folks has probably tripled, if not quadrupled, in this. And so, status quo is not going to get you anywhere. Matter of fact, it'll hurt you if you just keep trying to squeeze them, and it's just like, deal with it. They need additional staffing is one thing. The second thing that I'm hearing out of this is probably a lot of companies, especially the bigger ones, will put together like I'll just call it like a logistics council. They'll have your compliance, your logistics and transportation warehouse, maybe customer service, sales, technology or IT and all that. And that's fine for, looking at changes and all that. There probably needs to be a separate, and I'll call it a committee, that deals with the breakdown of specifically a product. What do you think about that kind of a approach?
Yeah, I agree completely. Yeah, I think the compliance teams we're definitely seeing, more hiring here because the costs are real, and like the costs of failure are also like increasing as well. Like, in some of the announcements, like the directives from the White House is saying, go for the highest levels of penalties for non-compliance and don't offer mitigation. So making sure you have it in order is really, really important, especially these days. I think just another kind of a clear illustration, that Brazilian extension cord, if you were to have imported that 7 months ago, you'd use one HTS code, one special code on your thing. Now you'd use about 12. If you wanted to import a Brazilian extension cord, you might use up to 12 or 13 different special and HTS codes, making sure across 3 different entry summary lines. So, if that is a good illustration of like how complex things have really gotten with all these overlapping tariffs, I think that's a clear example. But your advice is spot on. You do need to beef up your compliance procedures. You do need to bring in people from your finance teams. You do need to bring in people from your product development teams and sourcing teams to know, okay, can you ask these questions? And if you can't ask these questions, maybe you need to look at some other options, or lean on your supplier a little bit more to see what you can get, especially, the threat of 200% tariffs if you're using Russian aluminum. That should also probably wake up a lot of executives that maybe haven't quite looked at this before, or it's always been like a footnote on their on their monthly business review, right? And now it's like, okay, actually, this is the first 20 minutes of our monthly business review is just talking this. So,
and we've heard from competing brokers as well that, because don't forget, it's not just the, let's say, the intellectual work, like understanding it and having the details. It's also just the clicks in the system, right? So if you are working on a legacy system that wasn't designed to fill out 20 different codes on a product, suddenly it's a lot more work. And we had that ourselves in the first couple of weeks, where for a certain car manufacturer that is a customer of ours, which of course has a lot of steel and aluminium, the work went from 20 minutes to 3.5 hours per entry. And we managed to get that back down to 10 minutes again, because we can do that as a tech company. We can just adjust our products and automate everything and go through this. But you're also just dependent on the quality of the IT systems that your vendors are using, basically, to determine the cost, because they are going to pass on this cost to their customers. And the other thing that where tech can really help out here is on that compliance piece. So we, for example, have developed AI that can automatically check against your standard operating procedure and compare that against every entry that you've done. We do statistical analysis on all the entries that you do to catch anomalies. So like if you have a weird HS code, if you're an apparel company and you suddenly import live horses, we'll flag that. Or if you import flour and a kilo of flour is suddenly $500, that's weird, we'll flag that. And sometimes it's legit, sometimes it's, maybe it's flour made by Taylor Swift or something, but like normally that's a reason to look at it. But so we were developing this technology anyway, just to become, because we want to be the most compliant broker in the world, and the most automated broker in the world, which is how you become the most compliant broker in the world. Mm-hmm. But now we're actually re-leveraging that technology to help our compliance group and go like, hey, tell me what you want to investigate. It's like an ad hoc SOP, and we'll run that against all the entries. And now they can like very fast and very accurately find entries that might potentially be a problem that we filed over the last few months. And then as soon as we find like a pattern that we want to change, it goes into the system, and now every entry that goes out is automatically checked against these rules. And this is like this kind of technology we also want to expose to our customers so that we can help those compliance teams. Basically, they have to do the hard intellectual, but also the interesting work. Like from that perspective, like that should be why you enjoy your job, right? It's like figuring out the puzzle, but then the toil of going through all the entries and like checking everything. We hope we can make a big impact there as a technology.
You bring up something real interesting, and before we run out of time, I wanted to ask this question. Also, was that because of all the different challenges, let's say, in bringing in products and wanting to reduce that tariff, have you found that now you're exploring into different programs and I mean, you obviously are, but have you found that how that might have affected? Meaning, like, for example, like, will you flag or help the broker understand that a product that's coming in from Mexico, they're paying now, let's say 10, 15, 20, 25% duties on it. But had they applied USMCA, for example, I mean, now they're going to cut it. Now there's other strategies, for example, bringing in the product into an FTZ or a bonded warehouse to avoid the tariff today, and then not pay it until they actually introduce it into the commerce of the United States. I mean, drawback, that's a big thing. I mean, I'm thinking drawback folks are really busy today, and so have you found that you now need to like sway them to, whereas before, like Marcus said in the very beginning, it used to be super easy to bring in that cord, from Brazil before January, or before, I mean, even recently. But now, let's think of all these different ways that you can bring it in to reduce the tariffs on it.
Yeah. So this is really the realm of trade advisory, which is also something we do at Flexport. We have an amazing drawback program, which truly understands the different drawback programs, and we're seeing so recently we did a yield comparison to one of the other big brokers, and where they got 1.5 million, we got 5 million out of that, and that's just because we invested a lot in that technology, and we really leverage all the different knowledge pockets basically that we have. So on the tariffs and on manufacturing and on the trade agreements, and we have everything in house. And what we see now is, yes, there's a lot of opportunity to do sort of automated trade advisory. So, for example, looking at your bill of materials, see where you source things, and hey, maybe you can source a little more from there. And if that changes, it changes the majority of where your goods come from. You fall under different agreements. And then there's just hey, you're importing and you've incorrectly used MSCA because it's no longer applicable to this product, and monitoring that. So. Yeah, we're leveraging all of that internally right now to help out our customers.
If somebody is developing a new product or wants to add a new product to their lineup, do you have anything that I want to check this out? Here's, what I've got. Here's a widget. What's the duty rate as of this moment in time? What's it going to be? Do you have any tools like that somebody can use?
So if you have the HS, or if you know the HS code, because we don't do AI classification, because AI classification is not a solved problem yet, so we don't offer it yet. It doesn't meet our bar yet. But if you know the HS code, you can just go to tariffs.flexport.com. It's a free tool for everybody to use. You can plop in the HS code, or you can search the HS catalog, and then it will literally walk you through how to calculate the actual duties that you're going to pay. And we promise that it's up to date. You see a change log of all the updates that we've done.
And so it gives you the questions or the areas to look at there. I'm sorry, Marcus, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, if you wanted to, if you're kind of at that early stage of the development or production life cycle, it's probably worth talking to our trade advisory team early on and see okay, maybe what are some things here we could maybe do to try to save some costs? What happens if we make it out of this material instead of that material? Is there ways that we can, change this? And this comes into a concept that is a very tricky, very powerful tool, but very dangerous, called tariff engineering, which you may have heard before. So yes. Early on in the development life cycle, this is still this is the right time to try to do that. Tariff engineering, something that's already on the water. Probably too late. You may just be leaning a little bit too close to the fraud line instead of the clever line. The point is there's different options you can do if you kind of look at this early, and then use our tariff simulators to kind of see what that actual landed cost would be.
Yeah, for our audience, the tariff engineering is where you're looking at, and it's legal to do. It's fine. You're trying to maybe even from a standpoint of trying to do duty avoidance, if you will, or tax avoidance based on, if I add a marble slab on top of this table, it's fine. Or if I take it off, or whatever the case may be, you can change components of your widget, and then you might qualify now for a specific duty rate versus a higher one and all that. So that's fine. What you can't do is just try and manipulate all that and then misdeclare something to say, oh, well, we've come up with a tariff rate with a lower duty rate, we'll just use that. Well, no, if your commodity isn't that item, then no, you can't do that. That's fraud.
And
But
it cannot be a disguise or artifice is the phrase. Cannot be a disguise or artifice, and what that means is usually left up to the courts.
all right. Well, with all of this and all the changes going on, Marcus, do you have anything to consider that would be the most, the takeaway here that you would like people to give thought to here?
I don't think so. I mean, I think what we're seeing kind of overall with this AI boom we're seeing right now, and like we're using it ourselves. I think there's kind of two things that it's really doing is that AI is lowering the cost of intelligence. The idea of getting good answers, smart answers, has gotten a lot cheaper. But now the real value is moving from just knowing something to operationalizing something. And I think that's where a company like ourselves can really step in. Is like we don't just give you like kind of an answer to a question. We take that answer and use it to change your entries, change your supply chain, improve it, and save you money. That's really I think where there's a big portion here. So when it comes to staying on top of things, like the knowledge is the first step. There's a lot of companies out there that do great work, but being able to very quickly use that knowledge and operationalize it in a seamless way is, I think, someplace that we have a big advantage, and I think a lot of other companies, would probably benefit from if they wanted to look toward that. But that's kind of where I see this going. I don't see the pace of change slowing all that much, even no matter which way the Supreme Court goes on this. I don't really see that changing too much, but I think it's just important to try to stay know what you're doing, but how quickly can you take that knowledge and apply it to your products to save money is, I think, where a lot of business owners should really be steering their focus.
Alex, how about you from a system and data files and all of that perspective in handling all this?
Yeah, we'll be doing what we're doing today, which is just applying technology to help our customers. We want to be the most accurate broker in the world. We want to be the fastest to respond to changes and keep the cost low through automation. And that's all I'm focusing on. And of course, using the latest technology to get that done. So I'm working on a lot of products I can't talk about that will come out later this year that are really meant to help customers navigate all these crises and hopefully help them mitigate potential fines or other risk that they face. We try to stay cost effective for our customers, so they don't have to eat the cost of all this added complexity, basically, to their supply chain.
I mean, when it comes down to it, you are your own customer. So I mean, that's the best way to test that. When I wrote software, we had subject matter experts, but at the end of the day, we did not do an entry. We did not do a qualification or whatnot. So, but yeah, that's great how you all are doing that.
Well, folks, I will tell you, this has been a good discussion, and some of your takeaways, I will tell you at the C-suite, you need to make sure, again, your compliance area is beefed up, but also the compliance folks, the finance group and the CFO should be, on a first name basis and know who your compliance folks are, because there's a lot of implications there. Your purchasing, sourcing folks ought to be joined at the hip with the compliance, along with the logistics and all these different things that are going on, and your system folks as well, because your data comes from the knowledge of what you're working on. That knowledge has got to be fed in there, and then that's got to permeate throughout not only your own company, but other, your vendors and your clients and all that. So all that comes into play. We're trying to stay ahead of this ballgame. So hopefully that'll all work out. Like us, share us. We appreciate the support of the show. And we definitely keep growing around the world and keep getting more listeners. So that's fantastic. But with that, guys, thank you so much. You've been an excellent guest on our show, and we appreciate you coming on board.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
All right. Everybody have a great day.